All right. Yeah, no, and I appreciate you reaching out about the Scrum expansion pack. One of my colleagues shared it with me, and I joined the little kickoff meeting that they had on LinkedIn, the LinkedIn Live event, and then I got it, and I was like, this expansion pack is large. It was, roughly 52 pages, and I think the Scrum Guide in 2020 went down to maybe 13 pages. So it was definitely an expansion. So let me share my desktop here, and let's see. I believe I've done it. You're seeing are you seeing my view of it, or are you seeing the full screen?
We're seeing the presenter view.
You are, and I swear I picked the right one. Well, this is great. Hopefully this gets cut out of the final version. Let me try one more time. Share. One, two, three. There. I got the right monitor. That looks like the right preview on my
Yes.
side. Are we happy now? Okay, perfect. So yeah, so the Scrum expansion pack, it was a pretty substantial evolution of it. And as we go through, if you have questions or comments, I would invite you to just interrupt. I'm not sure how the hand up feature works in Zoom, so feel free just to hop on in. I feel like a lot of times organizations want to start using Scrum and they think it's going to solve all their problems. It's going to be amazing, remedy all those challenges. I mean, how hard can it be? It's a short Scrum guide, and I mean, if you even read the Scrum guide, I think there's a lot of folks out there who didn't read the Scrum guide and they're still doing Scrum. You've got the 2-day training course, and when I went through it a while ago, you just had to stay awake for 2 days and you got the certification. So I think there's a lot of Scrum happening out there. And the book that the Sutherlands put out said they're going to get twice the work in half the time. So who doesn't want that with this amazing Scrum thing? Um, but then the challenge comes in where it didn't fix anything. Everybody's busy. You've got velocities per developer. You have maybe people who are telling you your velocity should stabilize. You're trying to use all your resources, and I'll use my air quotes for that when you're in the sprint planning. But the team's not moving fast. We're still behind. You have unhappy stakeholders. One of the cool things that I like that they put into this Scrum expansion pack was a disclaimer to use it at your own risk, which I think should belong in the Scrum guide itself. That we it may not fix anything in your organization. If you don't fix things in your organization, it's not going to fix itself, and Scrum's not going to solve it. Uh, Before we kind of gathered as a group, Jen, Janet, and Laura and I were talking. The expansion pack was by Ralph Yakum, John Coleman, and Jeff Sutherland. And when they kicked it off, they made a point that Scrum is still Scrum. The Scrum Guide is still the Scrum Guide, and this is really introducing some new thoughts. And the reason I believe it needs new thoughts is there's a lot of organizations that are not filling the Scrum roles or the Scrum accountabilities very completely. You have Scrum masters who don't really master very much. You have product owners who aren't really owning products. You have developers who are being split across a lot of things. So there's a lot of challenges with how even the Scrum Guide is used. Then you have organizations that aren't really embracing empiricism or emergence. They're in here. You've got the GOAT document, the requirements document that you're supposed to sprint through. And I don't know if that's some experience that other people have had, but I've definitely seen lots of cases where we want to get all the requirements up front and then merely iterate through those in a scrummy-ish kind of way. So there's not much emergence. There's a lack of empiricism, and we'll talk a little bit more about empiricism later. And it really becomes sprinting through requirements, heavy change management, or in some cases, no change management, where the project's just allowed to run off the rails, and that discipline that really should be there for the scrum masters or the product owners is lacking. So quick question, did any of those challenges resonate with folks here? And if it's like a friend of yours who had some of these challenges, that's okay. um, we can hide behind the friendship. But I saw the thumbs up from Mark. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. For me too. I've seen that in lots of organizations. So the Scrum guide hasn't changed. I don't know exactly what's going on between Sutherland and Schwaber in the background, but the Scrum guide's still the Scrum guide. It's my understanding they agree on that. We still have the accountabilities, the artifacts, the events in there, the same values, the same pillars that are in there. There's one maybe exception that I saw as I started to go through the guide, which is, I'm sorry, the expansion pack, where now it's talking more about stakeholders as an actual role within the Scrum ecosystem. I'll call it the ecosystem. So you've got obviously product owners, you have product developers. So that's a naming shift that they started to make away from just developers. And then the Scrum Master and then stakeholders, they actually get a pretty substantial amount of writing in the guide. So um, I see chats occasionally. I will assume if it's something I should be aware of in the chat, just let me know so I don't have to context switch back and forth. Awesome. Thanks. So what's in the expansion pack? There's a lot of focus on the what and the why of Scrum. I get a sense in the Scrum guide, it's saying, hey, here is what Scrum is. The expansion pack really goes into a lot of the why behind that. And it's more than just the kind of that sense of, well, if you do the magic things, if you sprint plan and then 2 weeks later do a review and a retro, and if you get together every 15 minutes every day, your world will be fine. This guide really spends a lot of energy on why these things are the way they are, why the values are there, why the pillars are present. It also makes a good case that while Scrum can be used for lots of things, this particular expansion pack is really about product delivery for self-managing teams driven by stakeholder needs. So it's not one of my very first Agile conferences. It was, I think, 2009. It was in Chicago, and Jeff Sutherland's wife is a Unitarian minister. She was using Scrum to organize her church volunteers. There was a list of stuff that had to be done. They would plan, they would coordinate, and they would do their sprint reviews. That was like one of the most memorable things. That was 16 years ago at this point. And I'm like, I still remember going to that talk because it was about using Scrum for all kinds of things. This expansion pack is really about product delivery, and there's lots of product related conversation. If we're going to talk about something, we need to make sure we are using the same terms. So a lot of clarification around the terminology, and it's pretty substantial. It's not all 55 pages about expanded ideas, but it's roughly 33 on kind of really meaty Scrum content. Then there's some end notes, and I think I maybe have a slide on that, just nodding towards those topics. And then there's an appendix to it where it's a very heavily footnoted document. So not only do you have the content that's in the expansion pack, but then you've got all the homework for the reader if you really want to go look at empiricism or emergence, or I don't think they sociocracy is talked about in there. And so there some of these topics that are pretty heavy. And so the end notes are great for future study. If you read anything like me, it's a insanely dense document. So it's not one of those page turner novels that you just kind of cruise through. I feel like all the words were selected carefully. I feel like it's very heavy on the concepts, and so it's I don't quite want to say it's worth its weight in gold, but it is a very heavy, full of concepts type of document. one of the areas that invests a lot of content is around the complementary theory and what supports it. So pretty early on, it drops this nugget here. So I'll read it to you just because I think it's really interesting. It's Scrum's founded on self-managing Scrum teams, which is footnoted, emergence, empiricism, and lean thinking. So those are each could be books on their own. And then it's underpinned by the supporting and complementary theory below. And then it has a whole bunch more pretty heavy topics. And so for me, um, I mean, each one of those on their own is maybe a class you could take or a book that you could get and read. And it goes very heavily into those. So when you start to think about accountability, reduction of non-value add waste, framing work as problems, discover, delivery, value realizing, continuous improvement, how is that different maybe than how you often see Scrum being used? So this is the participation part, or maybe it's the same.
Yeah, I think it's time to let Scrum do what it's intended to do. And often I'll speak for myself, I don't get the time necessary to let Scrum take its roots and get into all these great theoretical benefits because the organization is just really hasty and wants immediate results and is quick to pivot.
Oh, that's an yes, the organization. We'll definitely talk about that a little later on. And in my experience, has been a lot of organizations just want to sprint through requirements documents. They don't want or can't embrace empiricism or their budgeting process isn't set up for emergence. And they self-managing teams. Well, what would I do if I'm a manager on a self-managing team? And so some of those things we can touch base on as we go through. Yeah, one of the concepts that gets talked about in the expansion pack, I didn't put the words onto a slide because I was trying to figure out what not to try to introduce here, was the concept of beyond budgeting. And it was one of the big Agile Alliance conferences. And the guy's name was Bjarte Bagsnes. He did a keynote talk on beyond budgeting. And it's really a shift away from big annual rigid budgets that we pretend will last contact with what we're going to do throughout the course of the year. So how do you create boundaries and allow for autonomy so when problems emerge you can respond to them and move forward? um, there's a little section on beyond budgeting mentioned in one of the appendices here, but again that then becomes a whole nother book and an adventure if companies wanted to go on it of finding alternatives to our traditional budgeting processes. So yeah, that's very cool. Thank you, Mark, appreciate it. One of the areas then that also gets talked about is the pillars of the Scrum framework. So transparency, inspection, and adaptation get a fair amount of content. Oh, and I see Robert. Yeah, thank you in the chat. Too much focus on just the basics, the mechanics, the form of Scrum. Right. Make sure that there's a planning meeting. Make sure there's a review and a retro, and make sure maybe the Scrum Master facilitates those meetings, but not really going down into the values, into actually this next topic, which is empiricism. I grabbed the words from the Scrum Guide. I promise I won't read these to you, but it feels like it's like, yeah, I get a little bit of information about transparency. And then within the expansion pack, they added a bunch of pieces that I think make it a more meaningful exploration of transparency. And I went ahead and just selected some of the words for me that stood out. So when I think of transparency, now this is encouraging somebody to let's see, I can grab the little laser pointer here. So we could build transparency to process work and the results, and maybe we have our goals, our product backlog as items, our outputs, the increments that we create. Um, we're looking at artifacts, experiments, releases, results, feedback. If I'm a Scrum Master now, or if I'm coaching a team, which I'll talk about Scrum Masters and coaches in a minute, now I feel like I got a checklist of like, have I thought about the transparency, and am I really bringing it? It's more than just the backlog, I think, was the key to me. So yeah, you could see the transparency of the backlog, but now we could, our emergent processes, the results, it feels like there's a really nice opportunity in a shorter leap to maybe applying the Kanban method in coordination with the Scrum framework. And maybe we can avoid some of those. Well, do I do Scrum or do I do Kanban? Well, if you're trying to create transparency, you could do Scrum and Kanban, because one of the first practices of Kanban is make the work visible, make your processes visible, because then you can improve going forward from there. I highlighted this because I feel like this is one of the challenges in this document. It feels like at some point somebody just wanted to make a point and they just chucked it in like stew. Like maybe the ingredient didn't quite belong there, but doggone it, somebody was going to throw it in anyway. So they talk about resources and they go, oh, by the way, people are not resources, which I completely agree with, but felt 100% non sequitur as I started to go through this content. So transparency, super important. Did anything jump out to you folks? Anybody here? And this is where I take a risk. Mark bailed me out. Thank you, Mark. I was afraid I was going to get left hanging last time. Does anything jump out to you guys about transparency in this content?
Something big for me. I'm on a team where I'm a developer that also has to wear the Scrum Master hat, and um, we're switching from where our project was in a big development kind of figure it out kind of phase, and get feedback from other teams across the organization. And now, as we're starting to get closer towards a deliverable with that, where we're it's a project that's a platform for the a different way to run the software. We're starting to need to get big organizational alignment, and in over the past year and a half, the teams had used to, oh well, this was like our big goal for the quarter, but as long as we get most of that, it's fine. And now we're starting to have to actually, like, oh, when we say that there's going to be a environment ready on this date, it needs to be there on that date. And other things like that, we're trying to work better towards not just being this insulated team, and make sure that people know, like, oh yeah, this will be available here. This thing that you're asking for, we won't be like, in giving honest feedback for when we're going to be able to get that, new like platform feature available for them.
Mm-hmm.
So this, looking at like this, it's been it's a nice way to phrase to think about and analyze this a little bit more.
Yeah, it's interesting. And yeah, I the place Scrum's going to add the most value is in work that is complex. One of the other concepts that I did not put a slide on but gets thrown into the expansion pack was the Cynefin model, Cynefin. So David Snowden's model, where it talks about work in different domains for simple, complicated, complex, chaotic. And the tools or the approach you take in each of those domains varies. And so if you have complex work where the cause and the effect might only be seen looking backwards, your best path is to just start moving, just start delivering.
Mhm.
And like you said, that big figure it out phase. So yeah, I love it. And transparency to when work will deliver. I see a hand up from Will. Hop on in.
Yeah, this is a great topic in regards to the conversation. What I'm finding is through the practice here is that the organizations, mine, many organizations that I worked in who try to employ Agile and Scrum specifically, they don't hire the practitioners who know how to apply it effectively. So when you're thinking of something that's already complex to make it more simple, they seem to make it more complex because they don't understand the simplicity of what they're trying to lead, right? And so it creates this entire vacuum of just a horrible experience, which then gets related to it's not the people, it's Scrum, right? That's the problem. And so then how do we work ourselves out of this bad idea? And it's really the people. So I don't know if you experienced that, Dan, but that's what I'm constantly finding. When we see good results, it's from good practitioners who understand how to employ it, how to work with teams and the leadership to do it, and it's
Mhm.
successful. But that's probably one of 10 success, right?
Yes. No, and um, yeah, I'll do my best to remember to kind of circle back on that on some content a little bit later. Um, I feel like enough people believe that Scrum is simple, and if you just get the Scrum Master to, um, if you get them into a seat on the bus, things will magically improve. And I get the economics. Your company has to bring in more than it spends. That's just how companies work. But I feel like they're looking for a seat warming Scrum Master often, as opposed to a transforming effort where they want some very capable folks. And I see Gene's hand up. It, Jen warned me that this might be a topic where people wanted to talk. So yeah, hopping in, Gene. Oh, I lost Gene. Where'd Gene go?
I don't know. I just saw him too.
I wonder if he maybe hit the leave meeting instead of the unmute button. When he comes back, we'll make a space for him.
There he is.
Can you
I see
hear
him.
me? Oh,
Hey, yeah.
okay. Sorry about that. So now real quick, briefly, one of the difficulties that I face when it comes to transparency is I think that in some ways transparency can feel scary to people
Mm-hmm.
because, and especially this comes into, reflection, the idea in Scrum of looking back, retrospective, these kinds of ideas, that kind of openness could at times, I think, feel threatening because a lot of times, and I just see it in business in general, people are trying to CYA. And you're afraid that if you start making things too trusting or open, that you could, it could be like, okay, this didn't go right or that didn't go, okay, who's to blame?
Yes.
So I just
Yes.
was curious about, if you had any ideas and, I know it's a pillar. I mean, it's a value of Scrum, but I think at times it's hard for people to follow that.
Yeah. I was mentioning before he joined, I think I was at a place a very short period of time, and they subscribed to something called the Great Game of Business, it's a really
Mm.
interesting concept. And the principle is transparency to everything short of individual salaries, and which is great. So we're in a meeting. The company had some financial challenges, and they announced they were hiring a new project manager. Any questions? And of course, Neumann puts his hand up because he's an idiot and believed that they really supported transparency. And I was like, well, we're losing money. PM's going to cost. Why are we increasing cost when we have this financial challenge? I got a call with the HR person after that because I was kind of undermining something, or I was trying to stir concerns. I'm like, oh, I thought we were transparent here. That was my mistake. And so if you're going to talk the talk, the org has to be ready to walk the walk, and it takes a while to build that trust that if you say it's okay to say the emperor has no clothes, you better support the first person who says the emperor has no clothes, or says, gosh,
Mhm.
those are some very fine threads that are being worn over there. Yeah, it was interesting. I see Tom had a question. How do you keep the management dogs at bay, specifically regarding the need for speed, measures, proxies, transparency? I want to touch on that a little bit later because there's a concept that gets introduced about outcome done versus output done, I think is the phrase. So um, I think the short answer is going to be give them better things to measure. So we'll put a pin in that and hold me to coming back on that one. In the concept of empirical process control, there's a nice build out of what that looks like. So the transparency is going to show you what the reality is. This is for me a beautiful place to start using the Kanban method. Total transparency might not be realistic for some organizations. We were just talking about a case where there's a lack of trust or a lack of safety or a lack of something in the organization that makes transparency unrealistic. It's not ideal, but just know that that might be the environment you're in. I was an employee at a place. We had a big project with C-level visibility. The project team said it's red. The next layer of management said, well, if it's red, surely we can get it back on track. So it's really more yellow than red. And the next layer said, well, if it's yellow, we should be able to manage it. So it's green. And so the CEO thought our project was green until we missed the date because the statuses went through this reality distortion field from red to yellow to green to, oh, poo, we missed the date. Transparency was unrealistic because there's so much pressure and somebody was going to look for that single neck to choke that nobody, as things got farther up, was willing to say, no, this project cannot be done on time, the path it's on. Maybe we could have changed things and saved it, I don't know, but we didn't get that chance because it just looked better as it went up the food chain. So transparency can build trust. A lack of it's most likely going to erode trust. That then is going to enable your inspection. If you don't have transparency, you can't really inspect things. So this inspection is about being intentional. I loved the quote and I threw it in here. Let's see, I don't know if I can circle things. Inspection without transparency is ill-informed, misleading, and wasteful. It's just beautiful. I read that and I thought, oh, that's amazing. I'm not even going to change that. And then the last part on empirical process control, and there's a bunch to go read in there, is this is where our opportunities to really make change emerges. And without adaptation, transparency and inspection is meaningless. So yeah, you can have all your charts and your data and you can look at them and you can hand wring about them, but until you make an adaptation, you're wasting your time and energy. And so the concept of experimentation is one that shows up multiple times as well in the expansion pack. Let's boogie on. So this is the slide that I had come to mind when there was the question of what do you do with the management? Because I've heard and seen all kinds of bad things done, usually with story points to measure teams. We want a stable velocity plus or minus 10%. If you don't, you're a bad team. We want a story point per developer day per sprint. If you don't, you're underperforming as a developer. I could probably think of 2 or 3 more bad things with story points. Fun fact, story points not in the Scrum guide. It's not in the expansion pack. It's kind of a neat idea, but I feel like people now go, oh, Scrum, it has to have story points. There's a beautiful section on each of these areas. So what could we do with customer outcomes? So are our customers getting more or less satisfied? Are we addressing more customers? Are they able to use the AI tool to solve their problem versus calling the cost center, which tends to, be more expensive than using little chatbots? What about our user outcomes? Can they get their tasks done more efficiently if you're writing something for financial institutions, frontline workers, can they serve the customers faster, better, more effectively with our tool or with this new feature than before it? You could think of are the stakeholder outcomes getting met? Are we releasing more frequently? Are we learning faster and then getting a chance to change and improve from there? Business outcomes, compliance. I had a financial institution that paid a very large, very, very large fine for being non-compliant with some anti-money laundering. They used Scrum to iteratively and incrementally become more and more compliant because they ordered the backlog basically for the lack of compliance that would cost them the most the next time around. And so we could literally quantify how much we were saving by becoming more and more compliant every 2 weeks. That's way more useful than measuring a velocity. Like that compliance had zeros on the end of it in a very big way. And then are we doing things for the Scrum team? Is the code becoming more and more maintainable? Can we validate it more frequently using automation than using human testing? Is technical debt being reduced so that we can make changes faster? Let's check. Is there anything in here that folks like about things to measure besides story points, which they have a place, but not as they're not an outcome measure? We'll keep going. It's all right. Not a problem. So these things, I think I have a little bit more on outcomes and measures a little bit later. Scrum values are mentioned in the Scrum guide, focus, openness, respect, courage, and commitment. That roughly half a page in the Scrum guide turns into something that's more than 3 times as large in the expansion pack. And what it is really trying to do is connect the values of Scrum to the different events and then talk about here are some of the downsides if the values are not present or if they're undercutting one another. This, for me, is one of the places where I feel like the distinction between Scrum Master and Coach is not helpful. I feel like Scrum Masters, when they're doing their job well, are coaching because when we're talking about encouraging ethics, looking at the vocabulary that's used, I mean, we already kind of poked fun at the resources for your people. Well, resources usually get consumed, burned, all kinds of bad stuff happens to resources. So what's the tone? How's the work happening? How are we treating each other? Is trust being fostered? We picked on those poor managers who are going to kind of distort things maybe if there's a lack of safety. So I definitely think bringing a coaching mindset to roles as Scrum Masters is super important. And the wall between Scrum Master or Coach that's kind of emerged in our industry over the last decade is maybe not a helpful one. That could be a topic for a whole nother day, though. Much like I felt like the jab at people not being resources was just kind of thrown in, I feel like the authors wanted to talk about this thing called the OODA loop, and OODA stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. It comes out of the Air Force and the way fighter pilots are trained to quickly look at a situation, decide what the next best action is. I'm sorry, observe it, orient to what's going on, decide what to do, take action, and then you continue to go through that loop. I feel like they just wanted to get the cool OODA thing in there. For folks who are interested in it, I think it's helpful. So you've got your openness and your respect. That's going to help the observations happen. Now we need to orient to that reality. You need to interpret what's happening, decide then how to respond to this particular change. That might be through changes to the backlog. It might be through experimentation that you decide to take on, and then get the clarity and the commitment to take that action in the next sprint. So it's one of those grab bag of topics that just kind of all got chucked into the expansion pack. And for folks who are kind of interested in military strategy, UDA's another area where you could go off and enjoy learning more about it. This next part, as soon as I get the advancing going, there we go. The question of, are we done yet? The Scrum Guide has the one definition of done in it. There's a new concept now that's in there, which is the outcome done, which is, have we actually achieved the outcome that we want? And I saw somebody in the chat put outcome is stuff completed that is wanted and used, right? So does it deliver what we intended? Have we improved the frontline workers' time to complete a task? Have we driven down the cost of our cloud consumption? Whatever those outcomes are that we're striving for are much better to measure than activities. And then from an output done standpoint, have we achieved a level of quality or doneness at the technology level? So this might be coding standards are adhered to, unit test coverage is in place. Those things are the output done, but we can also then look at, is the feature, the product backlog item we delivered, does that achieve the value that we expected? And if not, that might be okay. We might have done an experiment and we thought it would improve the frontline workers' time, and it did not. It went the opposite. Well, okay. Now you can undo that and decide how to move forward. So those are a couple new concepts that were in there. All right, quiz. If we meet every 2 weeks, Scrum once a day, use Azure DevOps, will we be successful with this Scrum thing? I heard, thank you. I heard a laugh. No, I mean, not necessarily. It's not magic. There's a big section on change and change. Maybe, right? Yeah, Smita, thank you for putting that in the chat. You might be. If you have, if the values are represented, if you take on empiricism, if the organization is going to start making changes, you might be successful. From a change standpoint, there's an advocacy to start with your, what they call disciplined emergent change in a direction rather than rigid plans. Sometimes we think on our journey to be agile and responsive, we're going to take a very rigid, pre-planned, static approach to that change management. We're going to put out our 2-month agile adoption plan and expect that it's not going to change, which is just flat out craziness. So this is going to say, start with change in a direction towards maybe being more responsive to your customer needs, or releasing more frequently, or increasing quality, or whatever those outcomes are that you're trying to achieve, and start intentionally moving that direction, but expect that it's going to be emergent change. Change, expect it to change. It's not an afterthought. It's not one of those, oh gosh, I wish we had a rigid change management process so that we didn't change. It's going to. And this continuously sensed and learned from and adapted to. Change is going to happen. Sometimes will happen in very unpredictable ways, but it's definitely always going to happen. I've had probably more conversations than I'd care to count with different people. Do you start with a culture change in a group and then expect the behaviors to change, or do you change the behaviors and expect the culture then to follow along with it? It's an interesting challenge, and I felt like it was one that the authors of the expansion pack shared an opinion on, which is it changes behaviors and attitudes, languages, habits, work climate, etc. culture is an emerging result of those changes. So if we start to change how we plan the work, how we respond to change, the language that we use, the habits, the transparency we build in, culture will emerge. The culture changes will emerge as a result of those behavioral changes. Um, there's some research that backs up when people start behaving in a certain way, they can't handle a cognitive dissonance between beliefs and the actions they're taking. And so if the actions start, the beliefs will tend to align with those actions because our brains don't like to be taking actions that don't align with beliefs. So the beliefs tend to switch if you can get the actions started. I don't know. Other people may have different opinions, but that was one research study's approach to it. So this is about intentionality, tenacity, daily progress, and creating accountability for behavior changes. Um, who's going to do this? This is a shout out to our Scrum Master folks or people, especially who are leaders. But if Scrum Masters are accountable for the Scrum framework being done, I see supporters, Smita. I like that. Let's talk about that in just a second here. Scrum Masters should be change agents. I don't know, Smita, if you're referring to the type of stakeholders that get mentioned in the expansion pack.
Yes,
Uh,
that's right.
you are. Okay, cool. Yeah, and it's coming up in just a second. There's a whole section on stakeholders, and one of them is referred to as supporters, people who are helping to enable that change. Yeah, so thank you for that, Smita. Supporters are critical, and the Scrum Masters have a responsibility to help pull those people into the change and make sure that they're aligned or to stay aligned with them. Um, this might be one of my favorite quotes, second only to the people are not resources one. The level of difficulty in adopting Scrum should not be underestimated. And I've been guilty of that in the past. The first place I was at, I always expected the Scrum change was going to happen very quickly. And you get a year or 2 or 3 in, and you're like, man, I feel like we should be farther. And we were doing good things, but the difficulty in change in an organization that's structured in a particular way to achieve particular tasks is very challenging. Um, because now we're talking about changing workflows, processes, systems, attitudes, behaviors, habits, the work climate. Um, it's tremendously challenging. And so that's where our stakeholders come in. So stakeholders are not Scrum team members per the expansion pack. It could be, I like this, it's an entity, an individual, a group affected by the inputs, the activities, or the outcomes of what's happening. And in the Scrum guide itself, it talks about stakeholders rather generically. In the expansion pack, it starts to enumerate different types of stakeholders. And I think for me, I like having lists of things because it's like now I can start thinking of, have I taken care of the customer stakeholder needs? What about the influencers on the project and not just the people with the budget? What about, I mentioned the bank that was trying to maintain compliance, legislative stakeholders, that's important, the financial sponsors. Um, and then kind of a cool one that got introduced here is the artificial intelligence stakeholder. Now that we are trying to use artificial intelligence to make work happen, we need to make sure that that machine gets the information that it needs to have to achieve those particular goals. This to me looks like I'm going to have to make a very thorough stakeholder management plan. And once you start looking at all those different types of stakeholders, and I think it's important because, like I said, Scrum sometimes can be thought of to be very simple. and it's actually fairly complex. I want to go to this one. So that Smita was mentioning supporters. So they're a special type of stakeholder. They're the people who can help with the change. They're invested in supporting the change as it goes forward. And are members often of that guiding coalition. So was it Cotter's change model, I think, wanted to have a guiding coalition to it. Getting those people who are the change champions. Yep, Smita, thank you. And they're ones who are going to empower the Scrum team. They say supporters who do not empower the Scrum team to do what's recommended in this document, they're not supporters. So they might be good people, but they are not supporting you if they're working against transparency, inspection, adaptation, eliminating waste, using lean principles, delivering increments, responding to change, all that stuff. So if they're not supporting it, they're not supporters. Any questions or comments here? I haven't paused for an intentional gaps in a little while. So is there anything that somebody wanted to call out?
Yeah, Dan, it's Christopher.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time putting people through DFAS's way of doing Scrum, which is almost always a hybrid because it's never a pure implementation. But what we always get lost on is the impact of the stakeholders. So we put a chart together, but I'm loving seeing them embrace the fact that stakeholders have a stake, because too often when I was doing waterfall project management, and invariably the project goes off the rails because somebody throws their hand up and says, "Hey, you forgot about me. I got to, you know what?" And whether they've got high power, high influence, or low power, low influence, they're still at the table and they want to be involved. And so I just had too many people who thought stakeholder register or stakeholder management was just an afterthought. Like who even cares? Kind of like a risk register to some extent. Like, oh, that's organizational risk. Everybody has it, so we're not going to track it at all. No, you still need to track it. So the idea that we're going to obviously shine a spotlight, bring them into the Scrum team formally as that fourth member. I'm loving this. I'm just absolutely, I mean, I can think of 3 or 4 slides. I've already got to change in my slide deck to present this. There's like, this is going to change the way I deliver this. So thank you so much for dissecting this and shining a light on this, because I got some really interesting reading to do ahead of me. Thank you.
No, yeah, thanks, Christopher, for that comment. And your comment made me think, so the reason a lot of places maybe feel they need to do hybrid, if I look through the list, oh, well, because the finance people, right, our financials, we can't plan except for in big annual chunks. So if we're talking about emergence and beyond budgeting, your finance people's heads are going to explode. If you're doing something healthcare related, the law is going to say, you can't just like test in production if you're doing implanted medical devices. Like that's going to probably end with somebody dying. So there is more rigor that has to go in depending on what you're doing. Or your vendors can't take changes every 2 weeks or multiple times a day if you're releasing within the sprints. The place I was at where I said after 2 or 3 years, it was like, man, I thought we'd be farther. The software was used by financial institutions and they had to back test the product we gave them to make sure that it wasn't changing things unexpectedly. They didn't want the software more than once a year because back testing was very painful for them. And so caring for all those stakeholders is necessary if you want to go faster or if you want to deliver increments of value more frequently. So awesome. Thanks for that comment, Christopher.
And the other thing to follow up with is the fact that I work with DFAS, which, if you don't know, is the Defense Finance and Accounting Service here in town. And the government's gone through a lot of changes lately. And it has really put a lot of teams under the magnifying glass to say, did you really embrace Agile? Are you really Agile? Or is it only working with this set group of people? And when you restorm, renorm, reperform, are you going to visit and end up with the same results? And most of the teams are finding out, no, we're only held together by spit and baling wire, this one person, or it's the scrum master, and when the scrum master left, I've got another team that is they're just blown to bits because all their knowledge and all their cohesiveness and their glue just walked out the door. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge, but I think this is, as you talked about, a change event that we can embrace by saying not just Scrum as a change event, but the new Scrum expansion as a change to how you view Scrum can also give us opportunity to revisit some things, re-emphasize, foot stomp, whatever you want to call it, and patch some of those bridges that are fractured right now. So it's just, I'm really excited. I can't tell you.
Awesome.
You can't help my voice. I'm excited.
That's very cool. I'm looking at the clock and we're doing great on time. I just have a couple more items that I wanted to touch on. And so I'm going to nervously comment on something I saw go by in the chat, which is there really hybrid agile? Dan's opinion, not on the expansion. You're either doing Scrum or you're not doing Scrum. The Scrum guide's pretty clear. Like these are the elements of the Scrum framework, and if you're not doing them, I mean, it may be okay. You're just not doing Scrum. Cool, party on. Agility for me is really a spectrum from, how much documentation, how often can you get working software, how much planning do we have to do versus how much responding to change do we have to do. And so for me, I feel like agility is much more a dial where you can kind of turn it back and forth. And depending on what your circumstances are for compliance, finance, all those things, you can be more or less agile. Scrum feels like it's binary, and not everybody has to do Scrum. I personally think it's a very powerful framework in the right situations. But I don't know, kind of fun. I saw that hybrid comment go by, and I couldn't help myself. I feel like I neglected product owners a bunch, and so I'll just apologize now. I did not. The product owner content was good, but it didn't get pulled out when I was looking at things that I wanted to share here. So if I'm neglecting any of our product owner interests, I'll just apologize for that right now as I realize that observation. The Scrum Master one for me was maybe it's because I've been closer to that role. I've seen that role more misunderstood than a lot of them. I've heard things like, yes, we would like you to Scrum for 3 or 4 teams. And yeah, eyebrows up. Whoa. There's a lot of text dedicated to how the Scrum Master supports. And I had one slide where I put a bunch of it in, and it was like a little 1-point font, and it wasn't appropriate. But we've got the Scrum Master supporting the Scrum team, the product owners, the supporters, and then there's more details on how they support the Scrum team, more on how they support the product owner, the stakeholders, and then the organization. And if there was a list, I'll have to remember who Mike, I want to say his name was Mike. It was a Scrum Master checklist, and he made the point at the bottom, like, I was on Do Not Disturb, and doggone it, still run. At the end, he was like, if you can go through that whole checklist and say you're doing this work, it's not a part-time job. And I feel like the list that's in the expansion pack does a really nice job of listing out all the different ways that a Scrum Master might support the Scrum framework being used in an organization. This is an eye chart intentionally because this is just one of those big chunks of text and all the things a Scrum Master could do to support it. I'm not sure the reasons Scrum Masters often don't do a lot of those things. Maybe your experience differs from mine. Sometimes I think it's because the Scrum Masters don't actually know what they should be doing beyond making sure the Scrum events happen mechanically. Sometimes I think it's organizations not allowing Scrum Masters to do stuff kind of up and outside of the Scrum team, and they expect them just to kind of make sure the Scrum team is doing Scrummy things and to share some statistics periodically. But for me, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for Scrum Masters to really help the Scrum adoption go forward. And then like the document just keeps going. When I had the little goats on the one with the balance scale, there's so much in there. Then the concepts of product thinking, of systems thinking, how do we discover work, what does leadership look like, and are we really doing a first principles thinking, which is what's kind of fundamental here, and how do we do the people and change. I don't know. I don't know where the expansion pack will end, but it's a valuable reference right now. And then the question will be, where does it go? And there is an expressed intention that it will evolve. There is a GitHub where this content lives. You can do pull requests. You could say, hey, you could write up a section how you think it should be, or add a section, etc. You can submit pull requests to that. If any of you are multilingual, it's in English only right now, so that would be an opportunity for you to contribute to the Scrum expansion pack. And they expressed that they intended to release roughly quarterly updates. So look for more. I don't know if it's going to keep growing, or if they want to kind of box it into a certain number of pages, or what that will look like, but time will tell. So with that, questions, comments. I see more hybrid chatter going on over there, but I have not been able to keep up with that because I can't talk and read at the same time. Yeah, Mark, what's up?
Yeah, my question is why? Why have such a big expansion pack? What are we thinking this is in response to? Because it's such a tangible, you mentioned the number of pages, it dwarfs the actual Scrum guide itself. Do you have a sense for the why here?
I can give you what I recalled, and maybe Jen, you can help me. I think I can go back and dig out their kickoff LinkedIn, where they did about an hour on the expansion pack, and they touched on the why a little bit. My understanding of it, or the way I recall it, was the Scrum guide just says kind of do these things, and the why behind those isn't very well understood. I don't think they got the intention or the complexity of, organizations are complex adaptive systems. You can't just go in and kind of wave a wand and expect your Scrum adoption to end on a linear path. And so I think they wanted to really share much more thinking around the why Scrum is set up this way, and how to go about using it within an organization. So that was kind of my general recollection. But yeah, I'll see if we can't dig up that so you can hear it from Schwaber himself, and I don't remember which of the other gentlemen talked about why they embarked on this journey. But yeah, no, great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
I did think it was in response to AI, because the first thing I know, besides that, I saw you talking on LinkedIn, which is what made me look at it to begin with.
Yeah.
And then when I saw about the product developer, and that they put that out, and specifically AI, they wanted to make all of this content more rich because the teams are changing so rapidly. And what does that look like? That's why I thought. I didn't read that from Schraber, but that's just what I got out of it.
Yeah, there's gosh, I mean, where aren't we talking about artificial intelligence anymore? But they do touch on AI as a companion to the developers or the human, but a very expressed intention to keep the human in the loop. And yeah, I mean, we are using AI for so many different things now. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, Will's talking Scrum Master. Yeah, and Chris, I've seen so many Scrum Masters that are just glorified facilitators, trackers, asked to be note takers, calendar invite senders, which those things have to happen. But yeah.
A one-person help desk?
I'm sorry?
Well, Will said the Scrum Master transforms into a role of being a one-person help desk, being overran by impediments that stop its true effectiveness value to the team. A one person help. Well, I haven't thought about it like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the simplicity of when you're good, especially helping remove challenges, everyone
Mm,
wants to come to you. And then you
no,
get inundated by so many, everyone. So it takes you from your role because all you spend your day is triaging everyone's requests. And
Yeah.
when trying to build a team, one of the biggest things that you face is teammates will contact you to talk to another teammate. Like, I'm having a
Mm.
problem, and when is this task going to be done? And I don't know. And it's like, we're a team. Reach out to them.
Yes.
Well, I thought that's what you did.
oh yeah,
Talk to a teammate. You know, so you're trying to establish that culture. Like, everyone's feel free to reach out to each other. It's not you have to go through the Scrum Master to talk to, one of the developers. But when you're good, you get everyone wanting to use your service. Oh, I need help. Contact Will, or I need help. Contact Dan, right? So that's where I see a lot of times when it comes to being a good Scrum Master, and you're good at this, people then pull you to all of these occurrences where they can simply do this themselves, but they don't, right? It's part
Yeah.
of the team, and you're going, this is what the team is about, right?
Yeah. And that the challenge there is to fix the system. Like what needs to change in the system? Because you're right there. When somebody's helpful, and I've been guilty of it at the place I was, once the help desk guy makes the mistake of responding to your Teams chats instead of forcing into the ticket system, by golly, I'd go to him because the ticket system, it'll sit like I can't do X, and a week later they'll go, oh yeah, thank you for your ticket. I'm like, damn. But if you message Chris and he responds, then the ticket gets solved faster. So it's really about that transparency to fixing the system. So what's happening in the system, how do we inspect it, how do we adapt to it, because yeah, we'll overwhelm the really good people and burn them out. Yeah.
But doesn't that come back to the outcomes discussion you had earlier, Dan? If impediments and triaging is taking 20% of a sprint by time or by um, developer teammate cycles, um, how does that cost get pushed to those supporters to uh, offload it off the team's shoulders?
Right.
Something like that. I'm not
Yeah.
a,
Right.
I'm not here to propose a solution, but
Right. But
I've
it's
felt
like,
that pain before.
yeah, here's the cost of the disruptions, or here's the pain we feel by production break fixes. And, yeah, one path might be to push it to somebody else, so at least it's not your pain. Hopefully, there's a path forward to like, man, maybe we should fix the root cause of whatever environments, technical debt, poor coding practices, lack of test automation, bad CI, whatever's causing or enabling that disruption to happen. Like now there's a value to fix that. So yeah, no, I appreciate it. I am keeping one eye on the clock. I see we're getting about there. Any other questions, comments, or Jennifer, do you want to wrap it up?
okay. Yes, I do. Well, thank you guys very. You know what? Can I just ask everybody a question while you're here? Uh, and what you think about an in-person event? Just if you could put or like give me a thumbs up